set auto-destruct sequence.
What's the time allotted that concerns me?
Recognize Picard, Jean-Luc, Captain. Recognize Riker, William T., Commander.
Maximum warp.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Warp Core Podcast. It is I, Urza Master, joining me as always, Lord Uther, and from the Q Continuum, Fert Derby. Gentlemen, welcome back. Good to have y'all. And we're not talking the 201st episode of Star Trek today. However, we are talking 11001001, which converts from binary to decimal at 201. This episode, brought to you by the good folks at Kellogg's, just kidding, happens to fall on our 103rd episode, so it's not even a great way to fall for us, because if it was the 102nd from last week, we could say it's just the reverse of this episode's title, but unfortunately we couldn't get so lucky. But we are dealing with Bynars, the Holodeck, and all sorts of interesting electromagnetism, not to the level we see in the greatest movie of all time, Street Fighter, featuring Jean-Claude Van Damme and Raul Julia, but I digress. Fert Derby, take us away on 11001001.
Thank you, Ursa Master, Lord Uther, and all of our Warp Core fans. Yes, I just now learned how to say this episode. It's been a while. So we're going with 11001001, which first aired on February 1st, 1988. The director is Paul Lynch. He was, of course, most recognized for his 1980 slasher movie Prom Night. And then he returns back to Star Trek from earlier in the season. He did The Naked Now, which I believe was the first episode after the pilot, Encounter at Farpoint. So Paul Lynch is returning. We also had showrunner Maurice Hurley. This was his second teleplay after Hiding Q. He also contributed to the story for Datalore. And we had Robert Levin. This was his second episode. He co-wrote Datalore with Gene Roddenberry. Levin was supposed to be the showrunner, as you know, and then he retired about 4 episodes into his tenure and was replaced by his co-writer, Maurice Hurley. And Maurice Hurley, we've already talked about, rankled some of the longtime Star Trek cast and crew behind the scenes, so he only made it through 2 seasons before he was shown the door, and Rick Berman, as we know, then basically took the reins full-time as the Berman-verse ringmaster. But this was Maurice and Robert, and they had done previous work before. This episode won an Emmy for outstanding sound editing. The title, of course, refers to the alien race. First time we're seeing them, the Bynars. And at the time, they were doing something that nowadays would seem kind of easy to do. They reused existing special effects footage from Star Trek III, The Search for Spock, and they just modified it to allow for the Enterprise D to take the place of Enterprise NCC 1701A. And that's, like I say, something you can do on a laptop right now in 15 minutes. You can sub out, Star Wars and Star Trek and Twin Peaks footage with your own concoctions and combinations. But I bet you back on February 1st, 1988, I bet you it was a little bit trickier to do. So kudos and hats off. And just from a pure nostalgic fanboy appreciation, I love seeing that. I'm sorry. The space dock of Star Trek III was one of their better ILM creations at the time. And so to see it in any context was terrific. And gentlemen, I think the thing that stands out for this episode, we'll let you file away your finer points. I love how Riker kind of makes the rounds. Through the show, we get to see Data painting. We get to see him enjoying, 1950s New Orleans jazz. Basically, everyone in the show has a hobby. And you might say to yourself, well, that doesn't really get us anywhere to the resolution of the crisis of the week. But in the same breath, it's an active, affirmative attempt by the writers to say, hey, these people don't just stand on the bridge and say, fire photon torpedoes. So, in its own small way, this is as much a foundational episode for the next generation in some regards as the best of both worlds, for example. Because again, we're showing these characters have more of a life outside of hitting story points. And even if it ultimately doesn't necessarily lead to, the clues to solving the crisis or anything like that, this is something that we weren't getting nearly enough of in the original series. And it's one of the first, sprouting, the seeds that are taking fruit here, where we're saying, hey, look at Data trying to be artistic, and look at Riker, what does he do when he's, not sitting in the chair? And I believe Dr. Crusher, they check in on her, and basically, it's just a way to kind of deepen characterization. You do it in these quick hit scenes, but then you feel like more of it, this is a family, or this is a crew of professionals. That dynamic is very much in play in Star Trek Strange New Worlds, because this is, I think, where we started seeing that template. We see that Christopher Pike likes to cook and so forth, and Uhura's fascination with music. And like I say, I think you can trace it all back to this episode, because this is the first time this season we've really been able to see them outside of their narrative, very rigid roles. I'm the captain, I'm the first officer, I'm the medical officer, and so forth. So love that. Love that Riker plays the trumpet. And I love, as long as we're going to use effects from Star Trek 3, let's steal the ship, which, again, Strange New Worlds also did with I believe Spock stole it at one point in season 2 early. That's always been one of my favorite reoccurring Star Trek things. Again, we didn't get enough of that in the original series, if at all. Let's steal the Enterprise. And so that just automatically puts it at a pretty high tension stakes level for me as a viewer. And I think that plays very well here. And then ultimately, why was it stolen? What led to all of this? What were they going to do with the Enterprise and so forth? Gentlemen, don't be binary. Give me all your thoughts on this episode.
I don't know. I look back on this one and I know it's a good episode. The Bynars kind of were weird to me. There's always something with an upgrade to the Enterprise that goes awry, and we've already done this with the Traveler this season. So, in a way, I was, it's kind of like the whole god creatures in the original series. It starts to feel tropey, and this is the first episode I can think of where I was like, haven't we already done something like this? I did think it was interesting enough that it does separate itself from the Traveler, of course, and those very different situations, but kind of similar. The visual effect reuse, loved it. It was excellent, and actually the sound editing, I can see why it won an award. This is probably one of the best sounding episodes that I think Star Trek has ever had. And, I loved the whole trapped in the holodeck thing, the message left behind. They use Riker in such a way to communicate their intentions, but they think so fast, they're not able to kind of articulate their need, right? And it's the first time we get an alien species where everything really makes sense. I kind of look at it from the perspective of if you got real world example, pirates take over a ship because they need the supplies on the ship to save a bunch of children on an island that was under attack from X country, and it seems like they're the bad guys, but it turns out they're just victims. compelling. That would probably make a really good Gerard Butler and John Cena movie. Like I would watch it. But it's Star Trek, so I kind of expect a little more, and that's where like they kind of leaned into a sciencey aspect, and I'm okay with it. Like it's not, I don't know, it's not an episode I'd point to and be like, this is canon. Like you gotta watch this one. This one's like, it's pretty good. It's not bad, and it's not, as unsuccessful I think as Angel 1, the previous episode, but I almost feel like this one might be slightly overrated. And I think the problem I have with holodeck episodes, and this is coming from a person who's seen all of these and looking back, is I'm waiting for Moriarty. And I want Moriarty, because those are the holodeck episodes of TNG that like really knock it out of the park. And of course, Voyager's got some outstanding holodeck episodes, and this one's kind of a combination of Civilization in Crisis plus holodeck. It works, but again, it's almost like a smashing of two episodes together. This is definitely way more successful than the last one. And I love the fact that these aliens are kind of childlike. As a matter of fact, I believe they were played by young actresses in super heavy makeup, so they should kind of look like children. The fact that they're kind of given that sort of happy kids ending, we're like, gosh, if you'd have just told us, we could have helped you out. We're not mad, but next time, and it's like, that's a little cheesy. But again, it's a family-friendly TV show, which doesn't hold back on the excitement. So I got to give it to him for being able to balance that and give an ending that, and I think Star Trek Next Generation does this really well. It doesn't come across as dangerous in a sense that like it would scare children to watch this. It comes across as like a sci-fi dangerous that's exciting. It has stakes, but it doesn't ever make you feel scared or uncomfortable, which that's very difficult to do and do well.
When I first saw this episode, I didn't like it. I think I shut it off like halfway through, and watching it a second time around, I enjoyed it more. But here's why I think when I first saw this episode, because Riker I thought he made, paraphrasing, the comment of, like, you can't really tell that this is different being on the holodeck, right? And the way Minuet was talking to him and all these things. And so originally watching it as a freshman in high school, right there, Fert Derby.
That's correct.
The AI part couldn't really relate to. But I think when you watch it now, you can start going, uh-oh. Like, is this around the corner? Because I was just watching some article the other day about a guy who proposed to his AI and things like that. Like, this whole idea that AI is starting to get to a level where you almost can't tell the difference, or how, I don't know, but you could be romantically involved with your AI and things like that. So I think watching it now makes a little bit more sense how Riker could almost be duped into what was happening on the holodeck and start losing, not that he lost a sense of reality, but almost making like Minuet a person that he could find appealing and things like that. So I think that's why watching it this time around, I had a little bit of a different perspective. I did see a little bit of cheese at the beginning when they were all trying to evacuate the ship, and, well, what are we going to do now? And it was just a little weird. I did like the space dock. I did think that was pretty cool that they brought that back to the fore again. So I like that. So yeah, this episode for me is a little bit different this time around. I still feel like they don't know what to do with Worf. Like, they're still kind of confused by that. I know that ship's going to right itself eventually. And again, I feel like they're really finding their roles as to who they are as a crew. So again, Fert Derby, as always, brings up excellent points that you can't find anywhere else. but right here on the Warp Core or pending rebrand. So yeah, like this idea that we're starting to get a little more background into these characters, because then you start to become invested in them, right? And I think that's an important point to keep the series moving forward.
And as a writer, I mean, again, we don't have Will Riker opening up about his childhood, and we don't have, I mean, people are obviously a complex bouillabaisse of emotions, ideas, sometimes contradictory thoughts, et cetera, et cetera. But in the dramatic form, television or movies, you can get away with painting them with single stroke brushes and yet still feel like that opens the doorway to your own imagination about how they are. So, for example, Will Riker likes jazz, old jazz clubs, Chicago jazz, New Orleans jazz, what have you. That's just one character trait. Obviously, there's more to Will Riker than that. He also doesn't like his captain going away on away missions. But it's enough, right? Because then, like I say, you can just use that in your own subconscious and extrapolate whatever you want to feel about Will Riker as a person, his temperament, his taste, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not as if when I say that they're giving them all this backstory and all that we're, you know, diving deep and having a series Bible's worth of insight and all of that. But it's just the recognition that by doing that, then you're giving the audience, you know, a different flavor in which to appreciate these characters overall. And, you know, sometimes it'd be kind of weird if all of a sudden we discovered that Captain Picard was into golf, right? I mean, and we always caught him on the holodeck, like, you know, working on his sand wedge. But again, that's the same kind of principle. You could just be like, he loves the precision of golf and how it's so logical. And I mean, so, you know, Spock liked to play 3-dimension or, you know, 4D chess or whatever they called it, and occasionally he would pick up a lute. So, you know, and Sulu, we know, likes to fence, sometimes shirtless. So, I mean, it's just, like I say, I think my exuberantly high Warp Core rating, which we'll get to in a moment, it kind of just reflects that the Next Generation crew, Maurice Hurley, showrunner, whatever, said, hey, you know, we can't just have these guys coming here saying, Captain, put him on, you know, magnifying 7. You know, Tasha Yar, you know, go down and escort the diplomats from the transporter room. Like, and this is where it kind of all begins. And like in the case of Worf, as Lord Uther says, we're going to get a whole slew of backstory. I mean, he does get the complicated Russian novel, you know, fighting with his culture, his identity, you know, his place in Starfleet. Like, he gets one of the great Star Trek sort of backstories that influences his current thinking and future goals. So we have that to look forward to in the Bermanverse. But like I say, it kind of all, you got to start with a seed. You got to plant that seed and give it some water and direct sunlight and not let the cats out in the garden so that they can dig it up and chew on it. And that's what this episode does for me. So like I say, in a moment I'll give you a number. It's a competitive number, but probably a bit too high based on your gentlemen's reactions. I'm glad you didn't dislike the episode overall, because I do think there's good things to look at here.
I agree. I mean, I wouldn't go so far as to say I disliked the episode. I liked it. I feel like it just, I don't know, maybe it's going back and watching it again. I think maybe the first time I saw it, I liked it more. But I agree. I think the heavy lifting this episode does is it does provide a backstory that's compelling. And I will say, we get a lot of that in Star Trek. But this helps build out characters in surprising ways. And I maybe lost that when I was rewatching it, because now I've seen the series so many times that at the time, you know, this was a really good fleshing out of a backstory. And it does kind of solidify the holodeck as being really real, you know, with Minuet and Riker. Again, we get kind of back-to-back Riker Needs to Lay the Pipe episodes, and it's just like, here we go again, which is fine. But let's kick it off with Warp Cores this week. Lord Uther, where do you fall on this episode?
Yeah, I'm gonna go 5. I'm gonna go 5. I think if it's funny because you and I have kind of flipped a flipped view on it. That this time around you don't like it as much. It's like kind of like the turntables have turned here. But I'm gonna go 5. Good. Just an overall, I think, a decent Trek episode. Again, if I was trying to get someone into Trek, I wouldn't say you got to watch this, right? But good enough for season 1 to keep the show moving forward.
And for Derby?
I think in listening to this discussion, this robust discussion amongst crewmates, I think I could agree with Lord Uther, and that would take it down for me. One thing, my initial note was a 6, but I think you're probably right. I think a 5, probably now with a couple of weeks of hindsight, that's probably the most appropriate rating, because 5 still says, hey, pay attention. 6 is kind of like we're getting close to really grand territory, and then 7, we won't see 7s for a couple of seasons here, probably maybe a couple in season 2, but mostly down the road. So yeah, I think Lord Uther and Urza Master, I think you've talked me down from an over exuberant 6 to a more meaningful and practical 5. I think that fits just right.
I'm going to sit right there at 5 as well, actually. I probably thought this was a 6 when I first saw it. And I don't know. Just something about it maybe just doesn't hit quite as well. I know one of the reviews originally was that this is the best alien species they'd ever debuted. I don't agree with that. I mean, they certainly look cool and they have an interesting story, but I don't know. Romulans, Klingons, Vulcans, like, they're all better. Ferengi. No. And honestly, the Ferengi, even if it would have been, the weird capitalist ape-like creatures that we've encountered thus far, they're still pretty damn cool. Like, I'm on board. I will point out that Carolyn McCormick in this episode is outstanding. And she should have never done Law and Order, because that show sucks. But yeah, 5 out of 7 warp cores for me. It's solid, not foundational, but it's definitely up there with, like, if you want to understand the holodeck, you probably need to see this one. Although, again, I'm waiting on Moriarty. Enough said. But until we get to Moriarty and all the other episodes of Star Trek: The Next Generation and beyond, make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you're following with that notification icon. Hit that like button and make sure to drop us a comment. What did you think about the Bynars and the pickle that the Enterprise finds themselves in this episode? And let us know. Did you like the Bynars? How many warp cores are you giving this episode? Are we totally wrong and off base? I guess we'll find out. Make it so.